Is violent speech protected by the First Amendment? Is Thomas Sowell only respected because he's a black conservative? Should you be ashamed of the US flag at a war rally? We take on these questions and more on this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. This is the show where we go through our social media feeds to find interesting takes, ones we like, ones we don't so much like, and we break them down, talk about what we do or don't like, and hopefully offer a unique or interesting perspective to you, the listener. My name is Donald, and I'm here with my co-host, Britt. Before we get started, as a reminder to follow us on socials, give us a like on this if you're watching on YouTube, and subscribe if you can. Our handles are Good Take, Bad Take Pod on Instagram, Good Bad Take Pod on Twitter and YouTube. So follow us there, and without further ado, let's get into our first take. This one comes from the Scientific American, which is a journal, like a news, publication that I believe they publish peer-reviewed stuff most of the time, but also offer opinion pieces and things like that. So they tweet this out with a full article attached, and this tweet reads, "Converting the existing U.S. car fleet to electric vehicles would require more lithium than the world currently produces, showing the need to move away from private cars as a primary means of travel." So, what do you think about this take? That it's almost like we're in the first half, you're like, I see where you're going with this, and then the second half, you're like, I did not anticipate it to go here.
Yeah, I think it's a bad take, mainly because of the second half of it, which I mean, the person or people who wrote this for Scientific American obviously just take it as like, well, we have to move to electric cars, which is just, I mean, if anyone knows anything about any sort of energy, it's like, that's not going to happen, right? Like, I mean, one, they state the major problem with it initially is like, we don't produce enough lithium. I mean, Joe Rogan had a really great episode talking, I can't remember the guy's name, but all these people that are mining lithium in these foreign countries that are basically doing it with their hands and maybe some hand tools and things like that. But it's still very, very difficult to mine that stuff. And it has not been made cost effective yet to have electric vehicles. On top of that, the type of electricity that we're using to power these cars, like, it pales in comparison in terms of like the power density of gasoline and fossil fuels for moving things. It's really hard to get that same level of efficiency, and that's why so many vehicles are powered by fossil fuels, because you can get so much energy out of so little space, and it's really available. It's really reliable. It burns, right, and that's really awesome. So. This is all, to me, it's such a bad take because it's clear that this ideology is not actually, it's clear that this is an ideological take because it's not actually looking for a solution or to unveil more about, what this means for the world. It's saying, well, we can't produce enough lithium and electric cars are inevitable, so that means no one should own a car. I mean, it's just the ideology is really clear in it, and that's what makes it so bad.
Exactly right. That's how I felt when I read the last part. It was crazy that the jump there was, so we need to figure out a way, like even if they put it in a neutral way, phrasing for the same kind of sentiment, what you could say that I think would be a more everyone can agree upon would say, showing the need to rely, like, to make more efficient use of electric vehicles, or to find ways to reduce the number of needed vehicles. You could even say in a number of ways, but this just shows the game of, moving away from private cars as primary means of travel. It's like, we want to modify your behavior. We don't want to modify the outcome that this leads to. We want to modify how you live. That's the easiest thing for us to control, rather than say, either we need to innovate further to figure out how we're, going to, I don't know, you could list it as how we're going to reduce the amount of lithium needed for these car batteries, or the amount of energy used per electric vehicle, so that we should embrace remote work as more people need it. Like, there's a lot of ways that you can solve this part of the equation without it reducing to people need to stop using private cars as their primary means of travel. It's like, we should have society offer things so that cars are needed less, or so that things are convenient for people first, in ways that also solve this problem. So maybe we need to innovate to find a new energy source that we aren't currently thinking about, or a new way to clean up air so that we can rely on part lithium, part fossil fuel, whatever it is. There are innovations that we don't know. There are ways that you can modify. Sure, an individual might be able to sell their private car and rely on public transit, and that's fine if they want to choose to do that. But I don't like it when it's phrased in a way that Scientific American is saying we need to make society move in that direction more. No, let's highlight, problems like, hey, converting everything to electric vehicles is problematic because of the lithium requirements needed, and then let people problem solve from there and let the market respond.
Yeah, I think that I can't remember the person. They're on Tim Pool's podcast. They're an energy expert, and they were laying out, how currently, the safest and most green way of actually transporting goods across the United States is through through the pipeline, right? Like
Hmm.
it's more green, less accidents, less fuel spillages, all that stuff. Than if you had to transport fuel via truck, across the continent and things like that. And it made me. He also had another point, which is like, traditionally energy has three factors within it that you need to consider, which is reliability, availability, and cost effectiveness. And then if you add a fourth factor to that, which is green, or whether it's solar or wind or anything like that, suddenly you actually start have to reducing some of the other factors to accommodate for that, and that's just the nature of adding another condition to any sort of input. And so green energy, a lot of ways, is not cost effective, nor is it reliable. So if you're going to have that be something that you prioritize, you're going to have a reduction in reliability and in cost effectiveness, as well as a little bit of availability, right? It doesn't produce as much. It puts downward pressure on those three things that are really, really important to us. And so when you look at the developing world, as well as, I mean, just in America, if you just moved off of fossil fuels all of a suddenly, so many people would die. The only way for us to truly get out of this, and this is where I was hoping, I mean, a journal like the Scientific American should be going towards this direction, which is, hey, we don't produce enough lithium. A, how do we produce more to accommodate this? Or B, is there some sort of innovation that's going to address this problem? Not like you were saying, we have to modify you need to modify your behavior. You must own nothing and be happy about it.
Yeah, it feels like people who are trying to add in that extra component, like you're mentioning, right? That fourth sort of factor of the green nature, they almost care more about adding that label than anything else,
Yeah.
even if you take costs into consideration. So, for example, in Washington State, a lot of I think the number one source of clean, quote unquote, clean energy that we produce here is through hydroelectric generation, because it's consistent in that it is available pretty much consistently at the same times throughout all of the day. Whereas something like wind power, which a lot of advocates really want to go for, that peaks at night when it is less needed and there's less demand. And dips right at the peak times of energy consumption, which is about 5 to 7 o'clock p.m. when people come home from work or start cooking dinner, use things like their washing machines and ovens and stovetops. So that's when energy demand peaks in Washington. Wind power is really bad because it dips usually about then on average, and it picks up at night when the energy demand is the lowest. Uh, Hydroelectricity is constant, usually mostly constant. So it's a better source there. It's our number one source of how much we get. And yet the environmental activists want to tear down the four lower Snake River dams in Washington state that produce the majority of that hydroelectric because of salmon returns. And again, everything has trade-offs. So would removing these four dams help salmon recoveries in the state? Yes. Are there more cost-effective ways to help salmon recoveries in the state? Absolutely, yes. So again, it's just they're like, oh, we'll remove the dams for the sake of the salmon, but they don't have a plan to why we should be eliminating the number one source of clean energy, something that you would think they would care about, but they
Hmm.
don't. When there's another hierarchy value on environmental friendliness. It sounds better to save the salmon than save money on electricity. And Washington State, as it is running out of electricity. I think it's projected that in about 5 years, we'll probably start having rolling brownouts. And we will have to start purchasing electricity from places like Montana because we will not be generating enough of our own, as we currently do. And so there's all these plans to, try to tear down these dams in the midst of a trajectory that doesn't, that already shows we're going to be using more energy than producing. But it doesn't always click that way because people don't think about it in terms of trade-offs and costs. They just think, what is the best virtue signal? What is the best look for me to cause to support? I want to protect endangered salmon, and never mind the data that shows the returns are cyclical. The returns are higher than averages before in other years. Doesn't matter that we could spend the money that it would take to tear down the dams to invest in hatcheries, whatever. There are a million solutions, but the point is that they don't want to look at the trade-offs of the costs and benefits because it's much easier to take the shortcut ways in a lot of ways. And I think that's what the Scientific American is doing here is that, there's a lot of possible solutions. There's introducing nuclear. There's, investing in other innovations to use more energy with better efficiency, whatever. But the easiest, the shortcut is modify human behavior through laws or other. Okay, and moving to our next post here, The Hill is posting a quote from Senator Ben Cardin. I think he's, I want to say he's like Maryland or something like that.
Maryland, yep.
Yeah, that's right. Oh yeah, it says it in the post. And he says at this hearing, quote, "If you espouse hate, if you espouse violence, you're not protected under the First Amendment. I think we can be more aggressive in the way that we handle that type of use of the internet." And there's a reply from another user, Walter Olson, who tweets, "This is flatly wrong. The Supreme Court has made it clear that there is no hate speech exception to the First Amendment. Advocacy of violence is usually protected when not inciting imminent lawless action. That Maryland's senior senator would not understand this is shocking." What do you think on the second take here, to be clear?
Yeah, it's good until the very end, which is he's shocked that Maryland, one of the worst states in the United States, that Maryland senator would not understand this. I think that's perfectly in line. I mean, I think Maryland is one of 2 or 3 states that is a shall not issue state for like concealed carry and gun permits. So basically they're saying like, hey, even though there's a constitutional right to you owning and defending a firearm and defending yourself, we're not going to issue any new licenses unless you're in the military or you're a police officer in security or something like that. So yeah, not surprised. Ben Cardin has this view, and very much in line with Maryland's take on the Second Amendment. Their take on the First Amendment is equally as bad and not constitutional. And Walter Olson gets it completely right. Advocacy of violence or having an opinion that that other people that do actually do violence might also hold does not make you an evil person necessarily. It might make you, unwise or make you stupid. But if you haven't taken any sort of action that is lawless or that is violent, what are we going to do? This is one step before thought crimes, right? Which is, hey, if you thought this or if you have the wrong type of idea, and we don't like it, we can jail you. And that's where this inevitably goes, right? Like people will say, oh, well, you're just using the slippery slope argument. This is you're being paranoid about this stuff. And to be fair, we were all saying this years ago, and here is Ben Cardin saying it. We need to actually be aggressive, more aggressive in the way that we handle that use of the internet. If you think about, I just watched What Is a Woman again with some friends down in Texas. They hadn't seen it. And I forgot about there's a Canadian father who has a daughter who he basically spoke out and said, hey, like, doctors, I don't want you transitioning my daughter. And they said, hey, like, 1, we're going to do it regardless of whether you say so or not. And 2, stop calling her, your daughter. She wants to be, or your daughter is actually your son or is a he. And he's like, no, I'm not going to say that. And he actually got put in jail. He's out in bond now. But for saying that, because they said basically, hey, like, if you don't use his pronouns, I don't know that this is how absurd it all is, but if you don't use the proper pronouns, this is violence against your daughter. And therefore, under Bill C-16 and the Human Rights Tribunal, we can put you in jail for it and fine you and hold you accountable. So that's where all this eventually leads. And, people like Ben Cardin, I don't really know much of his other political views, but I know that people that are in power generally like to wield things like this to their own ends. When there's no underlying principle that actually makes it so that, hey, I can point to that and hold you subservient to the principle that you espoused before, then whoever's in power can just wield it for whatever they want. And that is a really dangerous and scary place to be.
Yeah, this is a And absolutely, I mean, yeah, other than the last line, a very good take. You think about people saying, well, how could you justify this violent speech? And I think that the distinction of advocacy of violence is usually protected when not inciting imminent lawless action. That is the key distinction there about at least the current laws as they stand, because you think about how dangerous it is to not have a First Amendment, and you look at the UK and even even the one guy, what, Count Dankula, having his pug or his girlfriend's pug do the Nazi salute. He won eventually in court, but he was arrested for doing that because it violated hate speech or whatever. But you think about like even violent speech, it's like, it may not be a very nice sentiment, but I absolutely think that people should be protected from saying, flippant remarks such as all MAGA people should get shot. Like that's not a nice thing to say. It's an ugly thought, but I don't think that just because someone said that on the internet, they should be, their door burst down and them taken into custody. Similarly, I don't think someone should go to jail for saying something like furries all belong in the gulag or whatever. Like the people shouldn't advocate for that kind of stuff on a personal level, but having the police come in and get involved is a horrible precedent when it comes to speech and thought crime. And the move towards this as being a more acceptable and accepted punishment for speech is pretty scary when you think about it. There's also just something lovely about Ben Cardin, who looks to be about as old as planet Earth, telling us how we should handle types of things on the internet. I'm guessing that he was probably one of those senators who, when they brought in Mark Zuckerberg the first time, held up a picture and said, "How come my son's Facebook page isn't getting shared around as much?" And it's like, well, it's because it's private, sir. There's just a great irony of someone trying to, one, dictate how the rest of us can live, how the rest of us can speak. And it's uber ironic when it's a very, very out of touch individual telling how to run something like the internet, which has been a bastion of free speech when in its inception, and as it has gone along has become more and more censored and worse quality.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why they don't like it is because it's a threat to their power, right? Like,
Yeah,
and Donald Trump, for all of his flaws and how much you and I both don't really like him or support him, I mean, it was amazing to see how he was able to use the internet to take control of the United States and defeat the Uniparty. He had both
absolutely.
establishments, against him, or I guess the establishment against him on both the Republican and Democratic side, and his use of Twitter and able to get the message out over any of the gatekeeping of the the mainstream media or the corporate press was pretty amazing. And the only reason they're coming down on this is because it's their amount of control that people like Ben Cardin have been able to wield for years, decades, is starting to slip. And now normal people like you and I now have a little bit more power, and that's unacceptable to people like him. So the internet, the Facebook, the Google, as this guy knows it, to him, it's just a threat to his power. It's not actually some technological innovation that he should reason a principle through. It's just something to be destroyed.
Yeah, and people probably don't realize the extent to which the double standard will exist if this was put into place in terms of enforcement. Um, we can already see that when given the opportunity to weaponize and silence dissident, they will. You look at all of the revelations from the Twitter files. You look at, I mean, even just recently, the independent, quote unquote, Angus King, the senator from Maine, who caucuses with the Democrats and is just by any other name a Democrat. He asked Twitter to silence things like excitement for Rand Paul's visit, because Rand Paul campaigned on behalf of Senator Eric Brakey, who tried to run against him. And he silenced a bunch of different stuff that would have hurt his campaign. And so it's like, that kind of silence, obviously there is no level of, I don't know, like threat to democracy going on there. There's no justifiable national security threat for that kind of silence. There's no medical threat, for like COVID reasonability that they would try to make. It's just to help get this guy reelected. And then you also think about the condemnations of Donald Trump's violent speech and incitement, which was all overblown, but a complete lack of attention paid to Maxine Waters talking about going up to the Supreme Court justices in public and harassing them and shaking them down. And so not only will this get twisted to their whatever ends they want, they also just they will use it for the most petty things as well as holding the double standard. Okay, and our next take, and this one comes from Scott Horton, and he's quote tweeting Coleman Hughes, who's got a picture of Nicole Hannah-Jones. So there's a lot of Inception levels going on here. So we're going to start with the first tweet, which comes from Nicole Hannah-Jones, author of the 1619 Project. She tweets, other than being Black, what exactly is Thomas Sowell's expertise in slavery or history? Coleman Hughes, quote tweets that, saying, Thomas Sowell publishes multiple tomes on the history of race, conquest, and slavery, replete with thousands of citations. And then I think that follows up with like, what else do you need, or something like that. And then Scott Horton, quote, tweets that and says, the real question is, if Sowell's so smart, how come he was W. Bush's little lapdog on the terror wars? Just a basic B follower, no better than Rush, Beck, Savage, or any other neocon Mina bird. And then he follows it up with people protesting against that, saying, y'all, I'm a Black conservative. So what do you think, Britt? We like Scott Horton.
We do.
For the most part.
I don't like this take.
I don't either.
It's a bad take to me. And I it's not even that it's a bad take in his criticism, if that makes sense, of Sowell. It's like, I think Sowell should be criticized for supporting the terror wars. It's just like, man, like why do you got to do it like this, one, with this type of tone, and then two, when it's kind of adjacent to the actual issue at hand, which is like, whatever. And I guess Scott Horton's priority list in terms of, I mean, he's a pretty good libertarian economically, but his priority list and what he's known for and what he's an expert on is foreign policy. So therefore, anyone who does support those wars, which were awful, evil, and some of those evil things that have happened in the past 120 years, I mean, it's obvious that he would vilify anyone that supported those, right? But I don't know. I don't really know much about Sowell's views on this. Maybe they changed. Maybe you're a little bit more knowledgeable on it. I just don't like that, like, the infighting of it and that it's adjacent to what is actually being talked about. It seems a little bit needlessly harsh given the topic at hand. And the person that is being talked about.
Yeah, so I don't know exactly about his advocacy, and I think it's really unfortunate if it's as outspoken and if he continued to be. But what I will say is that Scott Horton is, it frustrates me to see this, because I understand that there are lists of priorities, but I also definitely believe in coalition building. So it's like, seeing Jimmy Dore speak at the Rage Against the War Machine thing, great. I love Jimmy Dore on war. I don't like him on so much of a lot of other things like economic issues and stuff like that. That doesn't mean like when someone says, hey, like, who's this Jimmy Dore guy to speak on anti-war stuff? He's just a crackpot. And then someone defends him and says, here's all these great things he did. I'm like, okay, but have you seen how he wants like big government health care? Like, who cares? He's good on the wars, so support him there. And I think that Sowell is not even good on economics. He's incredible on economics.
One of the best.
And frankly, I think, I don't know, because he's somewhat of a private person and he tends to stick into his realm, his area. But I tend to think that he would, by now, he's probably completely come around on war. And maybe there's some old inclinations where he's a little bit more hawkish than he should be. But frankly, I think that, when you are a true fiscal conservative, I don't like that term necessarily, but you understand that the wars are not fiscally conservative. They are not laissez-faire economics. They run contrary to the things. Being anti-war and being free market go hand in hand. And so I'm really displeased with this complete dismissal of Thomas Sowell when he's done incredible work in economics. He's done incredible work specifically in pushing back on the insanity of this like race baiting nonsense that goes on in the current culture wars. I just think you look petty and childish when you do this sort of thing, particularly for someone who is, it's one thing if you're like insulting like, oh, Ted Cruz wants to cut the
Yeah.
IRS in half. You're like, okay, well, he's Ted Cruz. Like, he campaigns on that. Does he really do it? Arguable. Sowell has written so many books that have done so much good. It pains me to see him besmirched in this kind of way.
Yeah, and I think there's something to also be said for Sowell's economic work producing anti-war folks.
Yeah,
And that
absolutely.
I think a lot for me, obviously I today am anti-war from like a human cost standpoint, moral standpoint, and things like that. But what woke me up to thinking about even just the needless wars that the United States wages and all of our military imperialism across the world is like looking at and realizing like, how do we support such a huge budget every year? And it's like, oh, well, understanding the Federal Reserve and then Sowell's basic economics, things like this open up my brain to start thinking about like the government as its overall power structure and why it's so expensive and how it maintains that control. And that's kind of like a part of that's one of the Jenga blocks that got removed that helped me, my entire blue pill, covered blind eyes, Jenga tower fall over. And so I just think that like Sowell obviously is wrong if he did support the terror wars, but I would say that his work has done more to wake people up that are anti-war allies, as well as just people that are good on economics. If everyone had Thomas Sowell's level of like economic prowess, or just had read his books, I think we would have less wars in general, because there'd be it'd be like, well, you can't support almost $1 trillion budget for the defense industry every year, and there'd be a little bit more scrutiny about that just from a pure economic standpoint. As well as the fact that you wouldn't have the Federal Reserve and these things that are awful that the military industrial complex relies upon to create their weapons of death. So I just think he's I guess to use a cliche, barking up the wrong tree. It's like, man, we're all on the same side here, even if we kind of disagree a little bit on that, or disagreed 2 decades ago about something. Obviously a very big thing. I'm not minimizing it. It's a bad take, but
yeah. I think the other thing I want to point out here is Scott Horton in this actually falls under the intersectional curse, where he's like, oh, all of you guys are defending him because he's a black conservative. No, we're defending him because he's written incredible works on this issue. And it's like, I find it extremely cringe that Scott goes into that, like, oh, he's a black conservative, that's why you love him. No, I like him because he's written really good stuff. Like Wealth, Poverty, and Politics is an incredible work in refuting Thomas Piketty's income inequality arguments. That has nothing to do with him being black. His expertise on slavery and history is incredible. And did he take an interest in that because he is black? Probably, but it's probably also likely because of the race baiters that told him he was a victim until he looked into things himself and started to do the research, right? So it's extremely cringe that he brings up the race issue, because it's like Sowell's just done so much good in this, and is so particularly insightful and has nothing to do with his race. So the rare Scott Horton L, but he's got to hold that. Bad take from Scott. Okay, moving to Calvin Robinson from the UK. Calvin tweets, Greta Thunberg comes across as a woman who has been manipulated and exploited for a political agenda, who benefits from green policies, big business. They scare young people into believing in the climate cult. They clearly provide the talking points. What do you think about this take, Britt?
I think it's pretty good. I mean, I think that it's not the people that benefit from green policies is not just big businesses, or maybe they're not even the largest benefactor of it. I think it's the politicians who make use this fear and of climate change happening to enact policies that enrich them and their cronies in big business. So big business does benefit, but I think the main driver of it is politicians. And maybe they're doing it at the behest of big businesses, right? Telling them to do this or that. But
just to clarify, he would agree with you there.
Okay, cool.
This take isn't to say not government. It's probably more to speak of like corporatism.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So corporatism, the marriage and corrupt marriage of big government and big business. I think they're the main drivers of this stuff. I mean, you think about some of the biggest proponents of like the minimum wage, is Amazon, because after Amazon established itself as the dominant player in the industry, in order for them to keep that space without other people, capitalizing on their methods and on the way they've done things and then streamlining it, The way they defend against that potential innovation, the competition it would bring, is by raising the minimum wage so that no one can actually get into it without taking a really huge loss. And that's the same thing that is driven by these green policies. They make it so hard for new startups and new innovations and people that might not be able to adhere to certain green policies, or might not have the amount of capital required to adhere or to those, makes it really difficult, to enter the market. And so, um, Greta Thunberg, I like that he calls her a woman because she's kind of known as a girl or a child. But correct me if I'm wrong, I think she's like 18 or 19 at this point.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, but she still kind of like puts out that image. So that I like that part about his take. Um, and yeah, she's clearly manipulated. The fact that her parents, let her become this way to, basically exploited her for whatever types of benefit they have gotten from it, is both a dereliction of their duty as a parent to her, and to their society in general, right? Like, to say children should be raised in with education and with the prioritizing being a kid. Instead, they're trying to say, oh, this is the kid that you're supposed to, young people are supposed to look up to. So they're also bad people, and I think they're also a factor, not just the big business. But great take in general.
Yeah, I agree. I think the piece of context that might help realize why I'm just asserting, oh, he would agree with you there. This was during the World Economic Forum in Davos or whatever, and there were like, he was. I don't know if he did, or if I think Rebel TV might have like gotten some interviews with her, and like we're trying to ask her stuff that off books kind of a thing, and so that's where this take comes from. So in the light of the World Economic Forum, when you're talking about big business, big government and big business kind of meld into one, behemoth there. Calvin Robinson he's a guy on Great Britain News. He's pretty conservative. I don't know if he's libertarian necessarily, but he's anti-COVID. He's got most of the correct views on things from what I've seen. And I think that I think this is astute, and it's something that I've thought for a long time about Greta Thunberg. I mean, she was a very convenient talking piece for people. Like, as dumb as it is to highlight, like, look, a kid has our views. It was a very, very sensationalist headline to use. And so, I mean, in a sense, I feel like Joe Biden and Greta Thunberg are both being abused in that neither of them are really in control of their lives in a way. Yeah. I feel bad about it for them both. And it's just it's unfortunate because there's so much propaganda going on that she's being fed. You have to wonder, is there any point at which she could even reasonably change her mind on any of this? Does she have a recourse? At this point, no. She'd have to be completely selling out her entire identity and brand, and no one would accept her, really. And so it's unfortunate. And I also think that this is the correct take when a lot of people just like to throw, oh, Greta Thunberg's an idiot. Oh, what a dummy loser. I'm like, don't attack her. I feel bad for her. Like, she's been, she's acting ridiculous because she's been set up her whole life to act ridiculous.
Yeah.
And if you're taking, your views from her, I think you're an idiot. But insulting her directly doesn't make any sense. I think spotting the money behind the puppet there is the real pernicious actor. So I think this is a great take. Okay, and our last take for the show here tonight, we've got Tower Gang Cole tweeting, honestly, if I was at an anti-war rally, I'd be more ashamed to fly the American flag than anything else. What do you think, Britt?
Yeah, so some context on it, I think that's important. The Libertarian Party had an anti-war rally in Washington, D.C. I think several thousand people showed up, which was awesome. But there was a picture that was posted of the chair of the party, Angela McArdle, speaking, and some people held some Russian flags up behind her, and everyone was saying, oh, how terrible, what's all the bad messaging. And then other people responded with, American flags and stuff behind her, another picture with American flags. And I'm assuming this is kind of about that entire thing. And I think it's a good take, like, honestly, in that America in the 21st century and the latter half of the 20th century is the biggest exporter of violence in the world, right? We are the empire, if you're going to liken it to Star Wars. We've got the stormtroopers we've got the whatever it is 200 plus military bases all across the world, and we go into countries unilaterally and take what we want when we want, however we want to. And whether it's to enforce the petrodollar, or it's because someone said something we don't like, or it's for a politician to appear tough, we do a lot of damage and a lot of evil. And so, the American flag, which maybe prior to World War I and World War II probably stood for somewhat of a peaceful nation for the most part. I mean, we still had some issues before that. Really, anything after that, it's a symbol for a lot of people of fear. It's a symbol of invading violence and an invading force that is going to take things and have no mercy. So, yeah, the concept of the flag, which I think is good in some sense because it should unite around like an ideology, or like, hey, freedom, maybe at its best, that's what it's supposed to do. In a lot of ways is now associated with, at least in the context of an anti-war rally, like, hey, we're on Team America. And unfortunately, if you're going to be on Team America, you're also going to be on the team of promoting genocide across the globe for the past 80 years.
So if I'm going to go, actually here, I think I have to say that I don't agree with the take. I don't think
Ooh.
it's necessarily a bad take, but I don't think I agree necessarily. And here's why. I think for instance, so to also clarify that the context, this anti-war rally was not just the Libertarian Party, they were part of it, and there were
Hmm.
other coalition partners, and that included a lot of people on the left. And why I think this matters is because not only did some flags have Russian, there was even a picture of a communist flag.
Sure.
And to me, I would not be more ashamed to fly an American flag than
That's
a
fair.
communist flag. And I think that also you have to keep in mind that the point of an event like this is coalition building, and there are a lot of anti-war people who are new, who are America first, and they're Trumpian. And you know what? I don't love the idea of the American flag for the reasons you listed, but I also think that the people who are anti-war because they are America first shouldn't be outright rejected either.
Yeah.
And I think that we should recognize that even as um, they, are using a flag that has supported a lot of bad things historically, it is probably a better symbol to say we don't want to fight wars because we want to prioritize our own country here first, and the American symbol or flag can be that symbol rather than the imperialist
Sure.
symbol. So I actually disagree with this take. I think the American flag is better in that context because I think it's meaning more like put our country first. Even though you and I again would recognize its history of sending the bombs quite liberally, I think that it's overall better because it is a broader coalition that I would rather bring together for anti-war purposes.
Yeah, and I guess I think this might be the first like general take you and I have ever disagreed on since we started this format.
Yeah,
But
maybe.
yeah, I think the context of where this is, or where you'd feel ashamed to fly the American flag, matters. I think about all of the conflicts surrounding back in 2002 and the terror wars and all the stuff that we've already talked about. Like, I mean, there was a lot of weird respect, that almost creepy respect that the flag would get, as if like, well, if you let the flag touch the ground, or if you don't fold it properly, or
Yeah.
whatever,
Oh yeah.
you might as well be killing the troops yourself, over in the
Right.
foreign countries and stuff. And so I guess some of that is attached to it, and that's why, like in the context of an anti-war rally, like that traditional symbol that has been used at least to me in the past 15 years to be like a symbol of our imperialism in other places, then if a flag was to be flown, it's like that to me. Other than the communist flag, I didn't really include that because it's not a national flag to me. If any
Sure.
national flag was to be flown, I think the American flag is the greatest symbol of war, at least in the past. Like I said, in the latter half of the 20th century and onward. That being said, I have an American flag, at my house. I don't have it up right now or anything like that, and I like the American flag for what I would like it to stand for, and what I think it traditionally stood for a long time, which was, these principles of freedom and individuality and innovation and hard work. I just don't know if it really stands for that as much anymore. And maybe your point is really good, right? This is like part of taking that back, right? We're flying an American flag, traditionally a symbol of war in the past few years, at an anti-war rally to retake that. that definition.
Yeah,
get behind
yeah.
that, I think.
I was gonna say I would still push back also in that, you know, the U.S. I would say is a horrible perpetrator of that, but also like flying the Russian flag, I would be pretty ashamed to do that only because again the optics are really bad. The the
And you're not
history of
Russian.
Russia, yeah, the history of Russia too isn't that great when it comes
Yeah,
to invading other countries either. So I don't know. Like I get your perspective, but I also think that I would see the American flag as having a lot more. Okay, this can be justified than
sure.
say even Russia's flag, even if you take the communist one out. But even still,
Yeah, the Russian one's just awkward. It's like, why? Like,
yeah,
that's just an awkward one. So maybe
the,
maybe I agree with you. Maybe I would be more ashamed to fly that one because one, I'm not Russian. It's
yeah,
like my cosplaying
yeah.
as Russia.
Yeah, I don't know. I get the sentiment expressed here, you know, and I think that that's right. Like the fact that people are making a huge deal out of the flags there and not something like the American flag too. Like I don't know. It's just countries just generally speaking kind of suck. State governments really suck.
Yeah, and I guess it depends. Like, is the American flag representative of the people or of its government? I mean,
Right.
traditionally, it should be representative of its people, which I think is awesome, right? Like,
Hmm.
the American people have a really great history for the most part, in terms of doing awesome things and valuing awesome things. The American government, much less so.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed for sure. All right. Well, with that, we'll wrap this episode up. So thanks so much, you guys, for listening. We are going to keep pumping out the episodes. So leave a like and a comment and all that good stuff. If you have a take you want us to look over, we're happy to do it. And we'll catch you on the next one.